Welcome back, friends, to our book club, Love and Responsibility, as we delve into the teaching of Pope St. John Paul II on relationships. We're using the book by Dr. Edward Sri, Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love, which is an awesome book. He breaks it down beautifully. I hope last week you had very fruitful discussions on chapter 1, as you talked about, themes about human dignity, utilitarianism, and kind of our tendency to be selfish or to seek out what's good for me or what's pleasurable for me. As you talked about maybe the three types of friendships, maybe the friendship of pleasure, utility, the deeper friendship of virtue. So I also hope you had some time to kind of maybe think and pray about it in the presence of the Lord, because I think really in prayer, that's where we can apply this teaching to our lives so that we can start living deeper friendships, deeper relationships that are truly life-giving. So be sure you take some time each week in prayer with these questions and with these topics. This week, we're studying chapter 2, which is titled The Sexual Urge. Kind of a provocative title. John Paul II spends a lot of time talking about the sexual urge in his book, Love and Responsibility. Dr. Sri kind of moves his discussion about the sexual urge to the second half of his chapter 2. And in the first half, he kind of rehashes some of the themes from chapter 1. Mainly the personalist principle and the utilitarian worldview, and he applies and kind of analyzes those two in the context of the romantic relationship. So men, women, their attraction to each other, boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, and wives. So it's good, brothers and sisters, to really keep in mind we're talking about love here. And so what does it mean to truly love another person? For the personalist who sees the world through the lens of a human person, to truly love another is to act in such a way that always respects the human dignity of another, right? For the personalist worldview, there's this conviction that each and every single human being has dignity because we're made in the image and likeness of God. And so when we relate to each other, we always have to respect that dignity. We can't kind of try to control or manipulate others for our own selfish desires. That would be to use another, to use them as a means to our own personal end. But we can't do that. We got to treat others as ends in and of themselves, says the personalist. The utilitarian worldview is quite different from the personalist worldview. The utilitarian says, the right course of action, the good thing to do, is to act in such a way that maximizes my personal pleasure. I want to avoid actions that are going to bring me pain or bring me suffering or in some way minimize my pleasure. No, I want to maximize my pleasure no matter what the consequences are, so to speak. So you can already see, right, for the utilitarian, he or she would be willing to sacrifice the human dignity of another person if it would bring about more pleasure, more utility for me. Whereas the personalist, they wouldn't be willing to sacrifice the human dignity of another person, even if it brought him or her more pleasure. So to kind of illustrate the utilitarian worldview and how it can be very superficial, how it's not what real love is all about, John Paul II and Dr. Sri highlight the example of prostitution. All right, so let's take the situation of a man seeking out a prostitute. So the man, in this case, would be seeking physical pleasure or gratification, and he can find that in a prostitute. The prostitute also has an interest in this, right? She would be seeking money. So the man has that for her. He can pay her for this service, right? So to the extent that they are both mutually benefiting from this arrangement, they enter into the relationship. But as soon as either of them ceases to receive the benefit they're looking for, the relationship crumbles, right? The second the man can find a more beautiful woman who can pleasure him in a better way, all right, he dumps this one and goes for that one. As soon as the woman, the prostitute in this case, finds a man who's willing to offer her more money, all right, she's going to dump this guy and go for that guy, right? So you can see the utilitarian worldview lends itself to very superficial, fragile relationships. Dr. Sri points out, and this is very insightful, once again, all coming from John Paul II, these utilitarian relationships, they breed insecurity. Why? Because they're not, for example, in like a romantic relationship, a man and woman, they're not really willing to deal with problems that surface because they're afraid that if they deal with these problems, it's going to complicate the relationship. And if the relationship gets complicated, well, it's no longer pleasurable. It's no longer fun. It's no longer worth it. This isn't what I signed up for. I'm out of here. So the relationship's going to crumble, right? Which is probably true. Probably true when you're relating to people on this kind of pleasure-seeking utilitarian level. So there's a real reluctance to deal with real problems. You might think you're saving yourself a heartache. Well, we all know that if you don't deal with your problems, especially early on, it's just going to build, and it's going to explode in the future, and the relationship's going to crumble anyway. So the whole point, we want to approach relationships from the point of view of human dignity. We want to relate, especially as men and women, on this level of, respecting the dignity of the other no matter what. Always acting in a way that's going to contribute to their flourishing. That's going to always respect their human dignity. Okay, I think we get that. All right, that's kind of the first part of chapter 2. He offers us some other examples of kind of how this utilitarian worldview is kind of socially acceptable. We enter into these relationships all the time. Prostitution is kind of an extreme example. Sex before marriage would be a very clear, socially accepted, the man seeking pleasure, the woman might be seeking security in having a boyfriend. They're willing to offer each other what he or she wants as long as they still get their piece of the pie, so to speak, right? Ultimately, once again, superficial. These are not what contribute to lasting relationships because they're not built upon human dignity. They're built upon self-interest and the pleasure that I can maximize for myself. The second part of chapter 2 goes into the sexual urge. All right, the sexual urge. John Paul II talks a lot about this in Love and Responsibility. He's literally talking about the urges we have, like the sexual urges that we have towards members of the opposite sex. This is a gift to us from God, right? God put these urges within us, and they're ultimately ordered towards personal communion on a deep level with members of the opposite sex. But if we're going to do that, we have to understand these sexual urges because they can also be corrupted to lead to very utilitarian relationships between men and women. Once again, that's pleasure-seeking relationships between men and women. So John Paul II clarifies that there are two dimensions to the sexual urge. On the one hand, the sexual urge is physical. It's bodily, right? A man is attracted to the body, the physical dimension of the woman. The woman is attracted to the body, the physical dimension of the man. That's the first level, first dimension of the sexual urge. And most obvious, right? Yeah. So the second dimension of the sexual urge is the psychological attraction that we have to members of the opposite sex. So the man is attracted to the psychology, and more specifically, this would be the femininity of the woman and the virtues and the characteristics that you might associate with femininity. Oh, she's so nurturing, she's so caring, she's so loving, she's so present, that kind of thing. Whereas the woman is attracted on one level to the psychological virtues and characteristics of the man, meaning his masculinity. Oh, he's strong, he's a good provider, he's courageous, right? These might be kind of traditional characteristics of the man. Not to say they couldn't exist in the woman, right? So there's always exceptions to this, and in many ways, men and women exhibit characteristics traditionally associated with the opposite sex. There's nothing wrong with that. But in a basic and general way, we're attracted to the bodies of each other and also the masculinity or the femininity of the other. John Paul II, Dr. Street, very clear that these dimensions, physical and psychological, these are attributes that that a person exhibits. So I am attracted to these sexual attributes. My sexual urge is towards these attributes that this other person exhibits. So this concrete woman over there, I'm attracted to her body, I'm attracted to her femininity. That man over there, the woman is attracted to his body, the woman is attracted to his masculinity. So ultimately, this sexual urge that we experience is ordered towards that person over there, this concrete person. And so if I'm going to respond in a responsible way to this sexual urge, then I'm going to act in such a way that's in keeping with the dignity of that concrete person, that woman over there, that man over there. I'm not going to respond in such a way that would do damage to her dignity or to his dignity. So what this means is that when I experience a sexual attraction or urge to a member of the opposite sex, if I just remain on the level of the physical, or if I just remain on the level of the psychological, then I will be very likely to enter into a utilitarian type of relationship with that person. Meaning, oh, I'm physically attracted to her. I'm going to act on that because I want to satisfy my bodily urges. Whereas if I approach it from a personalist worldview, then I'm going to say, well, no, okay, yeah, I'm attracted to her body. I'm attracted to her femininity. But ultimately, this is a human person. And I need to act in such a way that's in keeping with her dignity, meaning I would never want to lead her into a situation of sin, which would be, for example, premarital sex. No, I'm going to wait till marriage because that's truly what's right for her. And that's what's going to lead to her happiness and her human flourishing. That's what's good for me. And God's plan for marriage and God's plan for sexuality, right? So the sexual urge has two dimensions and it's ordered towards the person. And so we're going to be challenged to treat the other person in a way that's in keeping with their true dignity. This is kind of a brief overview of the sexual urge. Now we're going to break it down in chapters 3 and 4 into that physical and that psychological or sentimental dimension. So in the weeks to come, we'll talk more about that. In the meantime, have a great discussion with your group this week. You are in my prayer. May the Lord show you, right, his beautiful plan in a way for you, for relationships, so that you can have more fruitful and more life-giving friendships, relationships here and now. God bless you guys. We're united in prayer.